I'm going really old school today. Oh, I'm Paul, by the way, just in case you didn't know. I don't work anymore. I'm retired. I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I suppose I never really give up work completely, but I am doing as little as possible. Um, I can't see myself on the screen, but I'm hoping you can see me. Yep, cool. Um, so I thought I'd go really old school and start with a blank sheet. Okay, no slides, no presentation, no none of that stuff I'm going to do at other conferences. I thought it'd be really nice to have a guided conversation and start with a simple question, which is, what's your best hopes from this time we're spending together? Come in whoever you want to, whenever you want to, and I'll write them down.
To hear some examples of successes of people who have been dependent on substances and have now stopped.
Cool. So for those just joining, what are your best hopes from our time together today?
I was hoping for a little bit more talk about change because it's not all about success, right? They don't talk. I mean, it's a circling spiral working with abuse treatment, substance abuse treatment.
Okay.
I'm happy
As you're telling me your best hopes, I'm writing them down. And what I'm going to try and do is gather them into a bit of a, I suppose, progressive session and start with one which should lead into the next. But we'll see. We'll see if I can. Who's next? Best hopes for today.
I'm happy to be next, and my best hope is to hear some of your best practices, yours, Paul, and the other ones as well. So best practices, and to kind of have an idea of how you use and what exactly do you use from the solution-focused methods and practices that have been working exceptionally well in the past. So that's two of my main focuses for today, and thank you very much.
I'd like to hear, if possible, about how you hold hope and challenge.
Always.
Thanks.
So I guess my best hope is to learn about the maintaining a solution focus with a client who gets frustrated because they're currently on substances or are struggling to be present.
Okay, we'll make a start then, and we'll if anybody else has stuff that they want to, we'll have plenty of time at the end, I would think, to kind of bring other stuff in. So I'm going to start.
With substance abuse challenges that there's a lot of, a person goes back into that same state over and over again. There's a relapse even after you've done most other remedies for them. So how does solution focus help? I mean, how will it be bringing that miraculous change in helping the person getting out of substance and leading a normal, fairly normal life? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's just start with SF as a kind of concept. So regardless of whether you are in a coaching situation, whether you're in schools, whether you're using substances, SF doesn't necessarily change. Some of the emphasis might change, but SF doesn't really change. When I hear people talking about how do you do SF with this, how do you do SF with that, my first thought is always, well, SF is SF. Okay, so we'll just start there. Okay. At any point, if anybody's got any questions on it, just put your hand up, and I think I can okay, or see if you can, we can talk anytime. Then we'll talk about the change process in SF, because somebody mentioned the change process. I thought about this a lot over the last few years, and my view of change in SF has changed, funny enough. I used to feel that there was a lot of importance on how people change, and now I think there's more importance of how people see that they change. So it's become a lot more observational for me now than behavioural. So when we talk about next steps, or when we talk about what do I have to do to make this next point on the scale, I think that's a little bit of a red herring.
Yes.
I can hear somebody talking in the background. Sorry, it's a bit distant, Stuart.
Yeah, I muted Katie, sorry.
Okay, so really what I often think about is how will somebody know that they've moved up or moved forward? How will they observe that? So I think that my SF practice has become a lot more observational in practice than it has behavioural over the last few years. Not that it was ever entirely behavioural, but I think there's more to people noticing differences, and they're bringing other people in, what differences they notice rather than what they have to do. I think what they have to do tends to start going down the behavioural route. So if I give you an example, and say somebody gives me a scale, I know some people don't use scales so much, and I still do. Somebody says, "Oh, I'm 4 on the scale," and I say, "Okay, what does 5 on the scale look like?" And they say, "Oh, I'd be doing so and so, or this might be happening." Rather than saying to them, "Okay, what do you have to do to do that?" I might say to them, "What will you notice that tells you you've moved forward to that point on your scale? What might other people notice? How will you know? What will be happening that's different?" They may, of course, respond in a behavioural way. I'm not there to tell them not to respond in a behavioural way, but my view is if they can notice what's going to happen. And I take a lot of this from I've been a sports coach for many years, and we've moved a long way from what you have to do to how will you know in sports coaching. And I think that's a really good kind of analogy. Every time I do a little bit of speak like I just have now, I'm going to stop and wait for questions or input, so it's just not me talking all the time.
So I guess, Paul, if I've understood that, and it sounds brilliant, the what will you do bit almost is if you as the coach were directing them, what will you do, even though you're asking a question? Whereas when you ask it, but how will you know? It actually is really over to them about having a real think around, well, what is actually going to be different? How will I actually experience this change that I'm looking for? So subtle as it is, it really is a brilliant shift.
Look, I'm not opposed by any. I'm not going to say that SF people that say what do you do or what's your next step or whatever is wrong. I don't believe right and wrong is necessarily a useful concept these days. I think there's too much right and wrong in the world. I think there's shades of usefulness, and for me, that observational stance, as you say, hands it more over to the person, but also it allows a level of I'm not going to use the word visualization, but it allows a level of reality of situation, a situational reality to occur. So when somebody says, I don't know, in substance misuse, let's think of an example. Somebody says, I keep trying to stop, but I can't stop. I've tried so many times, it doesn't, really work for me. And I might say to them, so I wonder what you'd notice that tells you this time is different in some way, and that's a very open question that they can start thinking about. They can start going, okay. I know somebody on a personal level at the moment who says, I'm trying, I'm trying. I say, I believe you. I believe you're trying. And what makes this trying different? How will you know? What's the first sign to you that this is somehow different, that this is actually getting better, it's more successful, it's working better? What's your first thing that you will notice? And I think that lends itself to what used to be used a lot, the miracle question. I still like the miracle question, by the way, although I call it a wonderful question, but that's a whole other discussion. But I think if you get your best hopes question right, the miracle question becomes a little bit less relevant. But I think for some of you will know this story, a really good example, I'll get to you in a second, Daniel, a really good example of somebody that I was working with who said, I'm sick of this. Every day I wake up, I feel like crap, can't do this, I can't do that, it's a cycle. And I said, I wonder what would be, different on the day that you woke up, that things, you'd start to make a change. And he said, I'd probably have some breakfast. I said, wow, okay. Is that new? He said, I haven't had breakfast for about 20 years and too hungover. I said, wow. I said, so if that day happened and if you had some breakfast, what do you have? Oh, he said, poached eggs. I said, and what, why poached eggs? He said, I used to love poached eggs. I'm going to swear in a minute, so if anybody's offended by that, I'm sorry, but I'm going to use his language. He said, oh, it'd be a miracle. He said, and I said, okay. So I went through the whole sort of where you eat your poached eggs, at the table in the kitchen, who's there, my partner's there, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he talked about that. And anyway, he came back a few weeks later and he said, miracles happened. I said, what's happened? He said, I had poached eggs for breakfast. I said, brilliant. I said, and did you tell your partner? Because was she in the room? He said, yeah. He said, I told her, fucking miracles happened. And I said, and what did she say? Thank fuck for that. And that was a kind of the start of something for him. I'm not saying he didn't have any problems after that, but he could see what would be different for him in this particular life. I didn't say, if you go and make yourself poached eggs, you're going to be better. But he noticed something would be different. Daniel, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on the part, on the whole story about this change of question, at least, shift of the view. I think it's really important. I have seen it very useful in my practice to invoke the future, right? So what does it take to do a next step is a very complex question sometimes, especially for people who are in the drain for so long, right?
Yeah.
So trying to shift the focus to the future where change has already happened.
Yes.
It's really super effective way of putting him in the mind place, right? To be able to visual. Even that sometimes is difficult and hard because they are so long time here. I even try to move him. So it's sometimes counterintuitive. I even try to move him even further into the future when I can see that this kind of future change is difficult, where he cannot visualize what will be different. I even try to move him so far in the future to ask, so far in the future where you don't even think about this anymore as a problem, where you can even laugh to this part of your life. So that sometimes can trigger a solution talk, right?
Yeah, that reminds me, I'll come back to sort of how you maintain the future focus in a minute, because somebody talked about, when people go around in the cycle. But look, there was a brilliant book by Yvonne Dolan called Surviving the Sexual Abuse. And she wrote in there, I don't know if it was hers originally, a thing called A Letter from the Future. And it's something that I used to use in rehab when I was managing rehab. So you get somebody to imagine that all of this stuff has got better in whatever way that is for them, and write a letter to their current self or to somebody that they care about some point in the future where it has happened, and all the things that happened between now and then that led to that happening. Now, I think that's a great task. My slight kind of reservation is sometimes people aren't quite ready for that. And sometimes that future can be much more immediate. So if I'm going out to use this afternoon or this evening, what's my different future for today? What does a different tomorrow look like? And then maybe move on. Some people have gone round that cycle, somebody mentioned earlier, round and round again, but thinking so far ahead is a little bit scary for them. Okay. Any other sort of questions on that bit of a topic, and we'll move on to another bit of a topic? Your thoughts?
I'm just gonna sounds like what you're describing there, Daniel, is the difference between 1.0 and 2.0 type thinking, because a lot of 1.0 was how to get there, the next steps and that sort of stuff. The 2.0 is the realization of the is the thing.
Yeah,
That's what
I'm not a fan of numbering at 1 point or 2 point.
I know, but
I've written articles
differences.
about it.
Yeah.
I think solution focus evolves, and I think it evolves in natural ways. And there's some parts of, Innsbruck, Kimberg, and Deshays' practice I still hold dear. And there's some
Absolutely.
parts that I've seen are completely different from that.
Hmm.
The evolvement.
I understand that, and that's where the sort of that I find it helpful with the nuances that have the things that have changed that seem to have improved success or outcomes.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think there is no doubt that things have evolved. I mean, if you look at Brief, when they started talking about the best version of yourself, that to me was an absolute shift in kind of how we look at things. So that best version of itself can be forever, or a best version of yourself at work, or a best version of yourself at home, or a best version of yourself tomorrow, given the circumstances you're in. So I'm all for involvement. Sometimes I scratch my head a little bit when things have gone so far away from SF. I think, do I still get it? Maybe I'm a bit of a die in the wall for that. But yeah, good, Matt. Yeah. Other people? Okay. Somebody talked about holding hope and challenge. Really interesting, this one. And my friend Elliot talks about being a hope dealer, talks about, holding hope. I think the fact that people come to see us in the first place tells me they have some hope. Okay. My job is not necessarily to give them hope or to hold more hope from them or to be Mr. Optimistic and, over positive. But my job, I think, is to enhance the hope they have and recognize that if they didn't have any hope whatsoever, they wouldn't even be here. I think Deshazer talked about somebody walking in the room is always a customer for something. And I certainly believe that. I'm not going into a customer complaint and all that stuff. But how do you hold hope in the view of challenges? Well, I guess, again, it's not my job to do that. It's my job to recognize and encourage the person I'm with to, and maybe sometimes you amplify the stories of success. Sometimes you amplify the instances of change or the instances of things already happen, and pay less heed to the problem talk. But I don't think it's for us to necessarily choose and pick what we see as useful, what I hold as hope, because my hope for somebody might be a very, very long way from theirs. Somebody may want to, in substance misuse, somebody may want to continue to use, but use in a safe way. That's harm reduction. Okay, my job there is not to tell them that getting off drugs is the best thing we can ever do. Somebody might want to be abstinent and never use again. There's a whole gamut of people's needs coming forward, and if we start with a best hopes question, just to kind of bring back around to hope again, the best hopes from our work together. If that person then can articulate those, that's where you work on. That's the hope, because they've told you what those hopes are. Those hopes, and here's a really interesting one. I've worked in this field for 30 odd years, and lots of people have said to me, oh yeah, but I don't really mean it, or I'm not really telling the truth. And somebody mentioned earlier, oh yeah, but they're clearly, if they're still using and they keep coming, it's not my job to judge them. I've sat with people who are completely off their heads on heroin, for instance, and they're on what we call the nod. So they're sitting with their heads going down and they're telling me that they've stopped using. I might think, well, that's not the case. They're definitely still using, but it's not my job. I'm not a CBT person. I'm not going to challenge their core beliefs. I'm not going to challenge all of those things. I'm going to say, okay, so, since you stopped using, what did you do that was useful? What happened? And they might actually be setting a scene and telling me things that they can do in the future. They might go away and hold on to that one thing they've said. So a good example, somebody said to me once, and was really all of it, I said, so how have you managed that? What did you do? He said, I started coming to all my appointments regularly like you. I said, oh, great. And what else? He said, oh, well, I started seeing my family more. I said, fantastic. Who did you see most? Oh, my sister. I really got on with my sister. Oh, that's wonderful. Was that good for you? Did you? And we started talking about that. Anyway, a few sessions later, he told me he hadn't seen his family for ages. But just talking about it in that session meant that he went away and did do so. So it's not my job to kind of judge what's the hope that I hold for them. My hope is everybody gets their best hopes achieved. Hope. Any questions or discussion on hope? It's a really interesting one. You're a quiet lot. Pravali.
Yeah, it might sound like a silly question, but I see that you've worked with children and young people services in London. So how do you help young people, especially those in like difficult environments, genuinely believe that a different future is possible when everything around them says otherwise? So how do you give them that hope?
Yes, that's a really interesting question, and yeah, I've worked a lot in London, and it's where I come from originally. Look, I think acknowledgement and validation is common currency in any therapy, whether it's Rogerian, psychoanalytic, or whatever. Acknowledgement and validation. So yes, this situation does sound awful. It is an awful situation. Given that, what are your best hopes from here? It's very clear, and I mean, I know there's videos around, but it's like, hey, I'm 63 this year. Okay, I'm never ever going to run a sub 4-minute mile. So given that's the situation, what's the best I can hope for? And there's lots of evidence that people can transcend situations they're in. So maybe thinking about who else they know that's managed to do well. What did they notice? Who are the people that they aspire to be? What are the things that they really want to do, and how might that happen? Give a really good example, actually. It's a bit of a paradoxical example. So I worked with this young boy in Barnsley, actually not in London, but he was 15, I think, and he was referred by the school referral unit, saying he's not turning up to school, he's not doing it, he's getting into all sorts of trouble, we just want him to come to school, and can you make him come to school? I said, well, I can't make anybody do anything, but we'll have a go and see what's going on. And I asked him his best hopes question, and his best hopes were to be the first white cannabis dealer on the shore in Jamaica. I'm like, oh, wow, right, okay. So I didn't kind of say, no, that's not fair. You can't do that, best hope. So I kind of went with it for a bit. And his teacher's sitting there, his parents are sitting there. I said, so what would be the first sign to you that that this was starting to happen? And they go, no. And he said, well, I'd save some money to get out there, and I'd have a flight, and I'd buy my stock, and I'd do this. I said, okay. So just thinking about that, I wonder how you will notice that you're starting to do that, And anyway, he said I'd have to save some money. And I said, well, how's that going to happen? What's your plan? And he said, I don't know. I'll think about something. I said, okay, it's fine. And after the first session, his school welfare officer said to me, that's really inappropriate. You can't, he's just told you he wants to be a drug dealer and you're going with it. That's not okay. I said, I'm not going with it. I'm just not shooting him down. Anyway, sometime later, he'd come and he said, oh, I've saved a bit of money. I said, great. I said, how much have you saved? He said, £10. I said, how much do you think you need to go to Jamaica? So about 10,000. I said, okay. So you're a little way there. And we started talking anyway. This went on for ages, and one day he came in and he said, I've got a new girlfriend. I said, okay. I said, so how's that going? And he said, oh, well, he said, I'm saving a bit of money because I want some new clothes. I didn't say, what about Jamaica? I said, okay, that's new clothes. That's great. And have you saved any? He said, I've saved £50. I said, wow. So he mentioned that. He said, well, I didn't buy as much weed this week. I said, okay, that's cool. He said, and teachers offered me back because I went in twice this week. I went, okay, great. Next week a bit more. And then he's talking about saving to get a moped or a scooter so he can, drive around, And none of this was to do with Jamaica, but I didn't kind of remind him. He didn't remind me. But the fact was, he found his own way. My job was not to tell him that his hopes were wrong, but to kind of just go with it. And as it went through, things changed for him. And the goals that his welfare officer wanted, and his teacher wanted, and his family wanted, for him to go back to school and not to take so much drugs, it just happened. And he decided it was going to happen and when it was going to happen. It's a bit of a long story, but does that answer a bit of your question?
It definitely does. But that was really nice to hear. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. Other people on that particular topic, or I can move on to some of the other topics you've given me.
I just wanted
It
to
reminds me that
also-
story of a story Elliot tells of where similar sort of thing, and how he talked about it was how he made more room for the solution, made less room for the problem. And so amplifying the solution means you don't, like you say, you didn't have to amplify or talk about the problem stuff. You just made more of the solution.
I think it's really important sometimes to not I know there's a big thing about not complimenting people, right? And I think we inevitably compliment people by proxy. So when you amplify positive change, it will be received as a compliment by some people. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't have a problem with that. And if I ignore some of the negatives and focus on some of the positives, I again, if it's working for someone, it's working for someone. With the caveat that I don't diminish people's situation. Sometimes situations are incredibly tough. If you're working with long-term drug users, for instance, people on opiates, for instance, some of the people on opiates have been on opiates for 20, 30 years, and to actually envisage change at this point is difficult. Okay. Anybody else for something before and it's supposed to be a guided conversation, so I'm doing most of the talking, but I'd be interested to hear from other people.
Just wanted to reflect on the part of the hope, and I mean, for me, it's very much tied to curiosity, to being curious about our clients. And through this curiosity, we do give them, it's not compliments, right? But it is something that we are very much interested in what they are good about their strengths. And working with a lot of kids, youth who are coming from involuntary settings, right, where they are mandated to come, I always ask, thank you for coming. Maybe you didn't want to, but you are here. How did you manage to do this? So this is something very important that shifts them to their strength base, to their curiosity. I mean, my curiosity about their will and power and hope and what.
That's a brilliant point. Okay, so I've worked in rehabs for a long time, in what are called therapeutic communities. A lot of our residents are referred from prison. Some of them are actually finishing their prison sentence while they're with us. So I say with us because I'm still doing some management mentoring for one of the rehabs. And I would say to people, so how come you're here? Well, I've got to be. Well, you don't have to be. You could stay in prison if you wanted. Well, no, this is better than prison. Wow. So this is better than prison. What's better about it? And you've already started with even though they're mandated, here's the thing, okay? And I'll try to explain this in a brief way. Everybody that comes to therapy is mandated, and everybody that comes to therapy is voluntary. Okay. Everybody that comes to therapy has a driver. Okay. My wife will leave me if I don't stop taking drugs. I will go back to prison if I don't stop taking drugs. I've got to get healthy, so that's why I'm taking drugs. I'm coming to therapy. Those are the perceived mandates, but actually everybody that steps into a room with you or into a group with you is doing it voluntarily. Nobody's chaining them to the seat to make them talk to you. And even if they were, they don't have to open their mouth. The fact that they're doing something with you is voluntary. So this idea of mandated and voluntary is it's the narrative of a referrer, not the narrative of a person. And sometimes we can break that narrative, as you quite rightly say, Daniel, with the questions we ask and the curiosity. Curiosity not about them necessarily, but about what they want. Okay. Anyone? This is a great question. Really good. Anyone else?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So when we talk, how do you approach like a situation if like a young person, like a teenager, someone's household is part of what's limiting their ability to imagine, like the situation that you referred to, he was able to imagine all and change differently. But what about if a teenager's household is part of what's, stopping them from even being able to imagine a better life?
Okay. So first things first, our perception of what better is and their perception of what better is may be very different. Okay. So I've worked with some young people come from very violent households. Okay. And it's social service, you're involved and you do what you can and all the rest of it. But you actually know they're going to go home to violence. For them, their best hopes might just be that they don't get hit today. That's not in my control. That's not necessarily in their control. What can be in their control is how they respond, how they are resilient, and how we involve other services, for instance. So, look, at the end of the day, if that was a situation for me, any young person that comes through my door, they know and I know that actually I've got duties under the Children's Act and child protection and all the rest of it. But everybody has some limiting factors, which is why they come to you. Okay. But also, if you get the best hopes question right, and this is really important here. Okay. I can spend 20, 25, 30 minutes just on the best hopes question. Okay. If you ask, what's your best hopes from coming here today? Oh, I want to stop taking drugs. Great. Okay. Tell me a bit about yourself. You just let it go. Don't let it go. Spend time on it. The more time you spend on that best hopes and getting a really clear picture of where it is they want to be, what it will look like, what it will look like to others, what difference it will make to them, those questions build up a really, really interesting picture. And by building that picture, sometimes they start seeing possibilities they hadn't seen. There's a guy called Bill Hanton. He's a narrative therapist now, I believe, but he wrote a book once called A Field Guide to Possibility Land. I love possibilities. Possibilities are not necessarily optimistic. They're just options. It's a menu. Sometimes people don't look up from a menu or turn the menu over. They think they've only got a certain amount of options. Often they have more. They don't even realize. Somebody asked about maintaining solution focus with frustrated clients who are struggling. Who are struggling to be present. That's a really interesting question. I don't know who asked is still here, but
Yes, I asked it.
yeah, okay, Joshua. So can you get a little bit more? When you say frustrated clients, what do you mean? Can you give me a little bit more of an example?
Yeah, so it's a scaling question. They don't understand the scaling question. You try to explain the scaling question to them, they start to get frustrated with their inability to comprehend. Partially because some of the individuals that I work with have developmental disorders.
Yeah.
Some of them may be high on that particular during the session. Some of them may be hungover from the day before, and cognitively they aren't present enough to engage with the nuance of solution focus. I'm just wondering if they're kind of ideas that are in this approach that are I guess more rigid. I don't rigid is not the right word, but like that aren't as nuanced that we can still get to have a solution focused interview.
That's a really good question. Look, I'm going to say two things, and one's not to offend anybody, okay, and the other is to soften it a bit. The first thing is, if a client doesn't understand your questions, you've asked the wrong question, okay? It's as simple as that. In solution focus, if somebody doesn't understand what you're asking, it's your job to change it. So sometimes if somebody says, I don't get that, what do you mean by scared? I don't understand. Or what are you talking about? I might say, I'm really sorry. That was a bit of a clumsy question. Let me try something else. And you're doing two things there. You're putting yourself down off a pedestal, you're acknowledging their difficulty, and you're asking their permission to try something else. Okay, really important. So scaling. Okay, let me give you an example. I guess you have this saying in Canada. if I said to you I was feeling a little peckish, what would you think about that?
What do I think about you feeling a little bit peckish?
Yeah.
Oh,
What does it mean to you?
what does it mean to me? It means that you could go for a bite to eat.
Great, great. Okay. Actually, I haven't eaten for ages. I'm quite hungry. Is that more than a little bit peckish or less?
It's even more. Okay.
Okay, right, okay. Jeez, I'm starving. More or less?
About the same. Maybe
My
more than
gosh.
peckish, or more than peckish, or
Yeah,
or
more
more than,
peckish. More peckish.
Oh yes, more than peckish. Okay.
Okay. Jeez, I could eat a horse. Okay. More?
More. Okay.
So we use scales without using numbers. We use scales all the time. Okay. You're an okay guy. All right. My friend, my best friend, he's just the best person I've ever met. Okay. And my neighbor, she's horrible. Okay. I've just used a scale. Okay. People are able to use scales without numbers. And the rigidity of a solution focused practitioner using numbers is often about their level of experience in the practice. I don't think you need to use numbers. There's a hospital in UK Leeds called Jimmy's, St James Hospital, Children's Hospital. They started using pain relief based on smiley faces about 30 years ago now, maybe 20 years ago, I don't know, time's gone for me. And they started with a little screwed up emoji face. And the next one was and the next one was a straight face, and the other one was a smile, and the other one was happy. And they asked for children to point to the face that corresponded to their pain. And they administered pain relief based on where the child pointed to the corresponding face. And then they monitored it over the next 15 minutes. And if they moved up on that face, they knew that they'd got the pain relief right. Okay, that's scaling. That's brilliant. You know, that's fantastic. I don't often work with young children. I've worked with some 9-10-year-olds who talk about, problems at home being like a great big elephant. Well, that's more than a mouse. So we can do that. That's just scaling. Okay. I mean, there's other things you talk about around frustration or presence, or I believe, and it may be controversial, if someone is conscious, they can get something out of the work you do with them. It's your job to decide with them what they're going to get from that session.
I had a session recently, and it wasn't. It didn't have to do with substance abuse so much. It had to, there was somebody who was dealing with a trauma at home, with a difficult situation with parenting, and co-parenting. And I tried to keep it solution focused. I tried to keep this session like future focused, but there seemed to be this desire to keep it problem focused, and I have clinical supervision, and quite often there is this idea of like you can't go on until they're ready. Like there has to be that validation, and I feel like I came up short on that. I'm just wondering, like, how do I keep something solution focused and validate at the same time without staying in the problem,
Okay. So I'm going to pretend to be a client just for a minute and just give you a bit of a monologue. I want you to put up your hand when you think you should turn it into a solution focused question, and then think about the question you would ask. So here I am. Oh yeah, I've turned up again today. Nothing's really got better. Yeah, I used again yesterday. Life's pretty shit, actually. I've got no money. I can't pay my bills. I just don't know where I'm going to, really. It's not like it's always been like this, but right now it's great. Go on. What did you hear?
Well, it's not like it's always been like this. So I can
Okay, what's the question you're going to ask?
When it wasn't like this, what was better?
Okay. Great. Okay. So I'd let them continue their diatribe or their monologue or whatever you want to call it, soliloquy, if you want to be Shakespearean. And at the end of it, I might say, that sounds like it's been really, really tough. I noticed when you was talking, you said it wasn't always like this. Was it somehow different? Was it somehow better in the past? And then you encourage them to think about it. So here's a big myth about solution focus. We don't go into the past. If somebody's done things in the past that have been useful, why wouldn't you get them to utilize those again? Not a problem past or problem present, but actually there's a successful past sometimes. Okay. Worked with a guy who was an alcohol user, a chronic relapser, kept using, kept getting, really ill. And he talked about kind of, how he can never do it. He's been doing it for 20 years. He can never change, nothing ever changes. And I just started talking to him, what's your hobbies and all that. And he said he was a fell runner. Now, those that are not in England don't know what a fell runner is, perhaps. But it's somebody who runs up these shale cliffs. And it's a sport in the north of England. It's a stupid sport as far as I'm concerned. Why would you want to run up a cliff and fall down and break? Anyway, he was a fell runner because that was what his family did, and he did it. And I said, I guess you're not doing that these days. He said, oh, no, I still enter once a year to a local competition. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, when I know that's coming up, he said, I can lay off the booze for a few weeks. He said, but as soon as I've finished, I get straight back on it again. And it's up, down. I went, hang on. So how do you do that? And he said, do what? I said, how do you get ready for that, knowing that? He said, oh, well, he said, I've had this training regime that I've used for years and years and years, and it seems to work. And he said, but it's no good because every time I just keep going. So just tell me a little bit about your training. Just humour me. Tell me a bit about training regime. Anyway, as a result of that, I asked him if he would, or if he could, or if he thought it'd be useful to write a pretend training regime for stopping alcohol. A pretend training regime. I said, not going to have to use it, but if you was giving it to somebody else, what training regime might you write? And he wrote a training regime. And he was successful, okay? Because he was used to, in a different part of his life, doing something and seeing success, whereas he claimed that as, this is a 4-week period in a year. He said, she said, I've got 48 weeks a year where life's shit. Okay, so if that 4 weeks was maybe 6 weeks or 7 weeks, would that be useful? Would that be better for you? And he started to do that. Now, I wouldn't have kind of, I doubt if I'd have done that in my early days of solution focused practitioner, but actually I became used to doing that, used to kind of spotting where somebody is telling me what the resilience, what the skills are, for instance. And I tell a story of not success, okay? I worked with a young man once. When I first started in this field, I started in SF in 1993 with what used to be a brief therapy centre ER. Now it's just brief. And I was full of a miracle question. I thought, this is great, I can do this. And I worked with a young lad, and I asked him, and you wake up, and what would be the first thing you notice your miracle happened? He said, oh, my granddad would still be alive. Oh no, I don't know what to say now. And I made a real hash of it. And I gave him a really bad service. It was awful. Now, what I might say now is, well, yeah, I guess that's really important, and maybe that's not going to happen. What difference would it make to you if he was still alive? I start working on the difference, and he would say something like, I've got somebody to talk to, I've got somebody to look up to, and all that stuff, and we could move on from there. Okay, I hope that answers your question-ish.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. My best practices, gosh, and other people's best practices. Somebody's put a question. So it's identifying, transfer, and practically identified things. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it is about identifying things, and it's helping them to identify it more than it's me identifying it. So going back to whoever said about being curious, being curious about those things. I've seen DeShazer videos, and I wasn't a great DeShazer fan, I'll be honest with you, although I hold him in high esteem and respect because for what he did. But I remember him saying on several occasions, you've got to be kind of curious, or I'm curious about what you just said. And I think that's interesting. I think that curiosity, not necessarily delving into somebody's business, but the curiosity of what they know about themselves that might be helpful and useful. Is really useful. Okay. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left before we have to wind up. So please ask anything you haven't asked, or make any comments, or tell me a bit about your best practice with people that misuse substances or that use substances and just have problems related to them.
I took a course with Terry Pichot, and one of the questions that she used was, "What do you want?" And I found that really useful in just in kind of like in kind of a broader sense, just asking the client or the patient, what do you want? Like, what do you want from therapy? What do you want from life? Like, what do you want? What would make this better? I found success with it. Like, people, it's really simple, and people kind of know what they want.
Yeah.
And
I'm not opposed to that. It's not something I would ask. It's just linguistically, it doesn't feel right to me, but it doesn't mean it's not right. I think it, I think it feels right coming from an American. It doesn't feel right coming from me. I don't know why. I don't know why. Sorry. Maybe that's something I'll go and reflect on. But yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, I guess I'm more nuanced. I like to soften the edges of SF a bit. So I might ask somebody, if this session had been useful and you knew it had been useful, how would you know? I mean, you must have come here for a reason, and just soften the edges a little.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I sometimes I really feel like there's a European flavor to some of the SF, because I find that being more direct and blunter, especially a lot with people who are street involved. Like the nuance, that nuance doesn't seem to work in the same way as I find with some my more educated clients or my more professional clients. Like, the people who are like really close to the street, like, want it blunt. They want it raw.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a bit of a European flavour, but I also think, look, I lived in New Zealand for 11 years. Okay, and when I've been working with Māori people, that level of immediacy is not wanted. There needs to be a lot more social interaction as part of the therapeutic session. So, I would never even ask the best hopes question the first session with somebody with of Māori heritage. I might ask it later on in the session. My first thing would be getting to know them, getting to know me, what we call a whanaungatanga, process of whakawhanaungatanga is a process of getting to know somebody. And so I think you're absolutely right. Different countries, different regions, different places have their own nuances around SF. And we talked earlier about it developing. And I think it develops and evolves, and sometimes it's more appropriate to focus on one area than the other, depending on who you're working with. Okay. Got a few minutes left, folk.
I just want to apologise for getting my time zones mixed up. I'm so late and I missed it.
Don't worry about that. Hey, I got my time zones wrong until this morning. I looked on I reminded myself last night. So I said to my partner, "Oh gosh, I'm going to be up at 2 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock. It's European time." And I have meetings in New Zealand almost every other day. And when their clocks go forward and their clocks go back or whatever, it just confuses the hell out of me. So, and especially if I'm doing invite meetings, so I mainly get other people to invite me because I'm too clueless. I mean, one of my dogs has come to say hello. Hello.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, other people, got a few minutes left. Somebody asked about my best practices. My best practice has changed over years. There's no doubt about that. I think anybody in any walk of life, regardless of and there's some brilliant SF practitioners who are going to be doing it like 6 months. There's some wonderful new stuff that comes from people. But I think as you become more experienced in any field, you become a little less rigid and a little more, what's the word I'd use? accepting's the wrong word, but it's the closest word I can get. Encompassing. So I find things don't faze me when I'm working with people now. Very, very rarely do they faze me. And I find sometimes I don't need to turn the conversation SF as quick as I used to. Sometimes I can wait for the appropriate thing and not necessarily the first thing I hear. So I don't know if you can see I'm stroking my dog as I talk, which is very soothing. I find the more I focus on the person I'm with and the less I focus on what I need to do, the better my practice becomes. Sorry, do I teach somewhere online? It's from I don't really now. I do. It's an interesting one. I've just literally 2 days ago let my BAC, British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, accreditation lapse. I don't want to practice as a therapist anymore. I don't particularly want to train. I don't mind doing things that I want to do, but I don't want to do things I don't want to do, and that's maybe just a sign of getting older. I do a bit of mentoring. I do a bit of clinical supervision. I also, there's one person that I do have a semi-teaching relationship with. And if I'm asked to come into a uni or do something, I will. But I don't know if it's lazy or it's just I can't be bothered. I don't, to set up a training session online and to do all the things and then have people evaluate you and tell you what they think, you should be doing differently. I just can't deal with it these days. My life's too easy for that. But I'm always happy to share things with people. Anybody wants to send me an email after this, feel free. Anybody wants to have contact? Yep. Well, if you look on my profile, I think it's got a contact on there. But also, some people here have got my email, and I've also got a website which I'm keeping for now, but I might let go soon. So it's very, very simple: www.solutionfocus.uk.
I'm so